All right, so there are some options of dealing with the uh, treadmill of production. First option, which is almost always resisted, is to lower production to an equilibrium with costs and prices. Um, uh, this goes contrary to perpetual growth and generally is seen as not really a viable option. Um, make competitive adjustments. Uh, this often results in things like monopolies or higher levels of overall production. Um, if you're trying to be competitive, maybe you go out and you buy your competitor, which then allows you to um, capture the market. Now, of course, we know that monopolies in the United States are not supposed to be um, allowed to happen. But with all of the newfound power of the corporations, this is becoming more and more a commonplace where corporations, through corporate chains, capture the market and ultimately capture the um, the, the profits from the market itself. Or you can just say, well, we're not making enough as it is, so we're going to make more. And that'll lower the cost, and then that'll increase our profits as well. Um, uh, the losers in this process, those that are forced off the treadmill, create new products, and therefore they create new treadmills. Um, every company falls into this rut where I left AT&T because I didn't like the way they were doing things, and I started my own company. And as that company becomes more and more profitable, um, the ideals of why they originally started them begin to um, look a whole lot like the corporate entities they left in the first place. And of course, increases inequalities. We see declining worker income while rising corporate profits. Remember, with corporations, the only reason they are in existence is to make profit. And each quarter or eighth or 16th of a market cycle is going to be gauged on whether they made more profit. And once you get the production process as efficient as it possibly can get, therefore the cost of making the product is as little as possible and the prices that you sell them for are as high as possible, well, then there are only a couple of other places to make money. And that is one, lowering wage, and two, making it cheaper to make your products or getting rid of regulations that are creating financial problems for you. Um, the book talked about the invisible elbow. Um, what their invisible elbow is these negative externalities that are consequences of this treadmill. Um, in order to understand the invisible elbow, you have to have a little bit of background. Adam Smith, the Scottish moralist, author of The Wealth of Nations, what many consider to be the handbook for capitalism. He talked about the invisible hand. And so the invisible elbow is in contrast the invisible hand, which provides a rosy suggestion that the treadmill's market competition leads only to positive externalities, and that both people and the environment get compromised in the process, often unintentionally. But Smith was saying that there's this magic um, relationship between supply and demand that would ultimately embedded in what he referred to as a fellow feeling, which was respect by both parties engaged in the transaction, that it would allow for the optimum price to take shape. But as we know, there's a lot more going on here than just a relationship between supply and demand. Once again, this brings us back to externalities, or the economic effects not taken into account in the decision making in a market. An externality could be the pollution that goes into the air because of carbon emissions due to driving vehicles. Or it could be the effluent that is delivered to a river as a result of the carpet making or the paper making process. Those two I explained are negative externalities. These costs not included in economic decision making and generally borne by those who did not make the decision. So if you're swimming in the river when the paper mill's effluent is released, you're in trouble. And the trouble is not because of anything that you did. And then, of course, there's positive externalities, benefits that were not taken into account in an economic decision and which may have wide utility. We'd like to think there's more positive externalities than negative, but if you're being a realist, that just is not realistic. The visibility of these externalities is extremely important. Out of sight, out of mind, folks. If we don't see it, we don't care about it. A great example of this is what is happening to the Ogoni in Ogoniland in Africa near Nigeria. Ogoniland is very rich in oil, and Shell has purchased the natural resource rights to that oil, and in an effort to get it out of the ground, they are trashing Ogoniland, and they are making it very, very difficult for the Ogoni to continue to sustain themselves in the environments that they live in. Do we care about that? No. We care about oil. And as long as we don't have to look at Ogoniland or deal with those Ogoni that were displaced, we don't care at all. This ability to see and appreciate an externality, whether it's positive or negative, is the first step towards creating social conditions that promote the former over the latter. And we have to be really clear on this. Creating this visibility is a political act of considerable social and environmental importance. If it's not seen, we don't care. So if you want to change the world, you have to make it visible to others. Social inequality in the 1950s in the deep south of the United States was out of sight, out of mind, unless you were in the South itself. So people in other parts of the country didn't pay much attention until televisions started bringing, the news agencies started bringing these images of people being abused in the South simply because they wanted to sit at a lunch counter at the local Woolworths. Making inequality visible changed the way we saw inequality. Something else we have to think about in reference to money and markets is the development of growth machines. This goes hand in hand with the idea of permanent growth. These local growth coalitions or local alliances that band together to advocate economic growth. They're well organized, and they're much more organized than your traditional neighborhood groups. These business development communities, the Better Business Coalitions in towns wield a lot of power because towns think that the best way to make their places better is to facilitate growth. And this ultimately results in what Logan and Malch called a growth machine, where we're encouraging almost any kind of economic development. And this economic development is frequently with little regard for environmental consequences or wishes of affected neighborhoods. If a company that deals with hazardous waste wants to come to your town and they offer the business community a lot of money to allow them to relocate, well, the business community will probably locate them next to the people that have the least amount of power, and then justify this as the placement of this company in this location as economic development that will provide jobs for these low-income people, even when the low-income people are saying they don't want it. When we think about these growth machines, we have to recognize there are some competing values. Use value of a place where local people have investments in homes, strong neighborhoods, supportive networks of friends and family, and a clean and secure environment. So they care, they value the place that they live in, versus exchange value of a place where local businesses have investments in ways that places can be used to make money. So these two values are often in conflict and incompatible. So when Coca-Cola arrives in Deer Lick, Michigan, and files for a water permit from the local business community says, oh, this is a way for us to make money. Whereas the local people say, no, we cannot do this, because when they start pumping, they are going to draw down the water table. It's going to deplete our streams. It's going to impact the biotic community that relies on this water over time, and it's going to make our place less valuable. We like being able to go out and walk the streams. We like being able to go out and interact in our wooded areas. And Coca-Cola arriving is going to jeopardize that. This, of course, creates environmental conflict, whereas conflict in the tasks people set for local government, one results of the politics, or conflict in the task people set for local government, which is one of the results of the politics of the growth machine. Government finds itself in a tricky place here, because the governments are expected to promote economic growth, but they're also expected to protect environmental impacts. So can you do both at the same time? Yes, but it's difficult, because growth protecting environmental impacts is more expensive than growth not protecting environmental impacts. Another important concept to think about, much in line with Emanuel Wallerstein's world systems theory, is this idea of core and periphery. Core regions are where wealth tends to flow, and they flow from the peripheral ones, feeding the former and bleeding the latter. This type of relationship is not trying to allow periphery countries to become core countries. They are periphery for a reason. These two are represented by differences in political and economic power, where the core regions are more powerful and exert that power over the peripheral ones. And of course, it creates a hegemonic state, where a core nation that enjoys productive and financial dominance, which gives them an edge over other core states and thus reigns in the world markets. The United States at this moment is the hegemonic power, but we could be replaced. China is looking like they're wanting to take the mantle of that leadership, and we'll see as we move forward.